Meanwhile, the crisis in the Justice Department continues apace, including some fascinating new New York Times reporting that sort of fleshes out what's been going on in one federal prosecutor's office that appears to have been compromised. I'm not sure if that's the right word. It's certainly been at least partially taken over. And this is reporting that lines up with some previous reporting about this crisis in the rule of law and in the Justice Department. But it honestly also just gives us a new window into how bad it really is. That's particularly helpful right now because the Roger Stone case, which has occasioned so much of the crisis at the Justice Department, so much of our public window into what's going wrong at the Justice Department, the Roger Stone case is still banging around inside the federal court system in Washington, D.C. You might have seen over the weekend a headline about a ruling from the judge in the Stone case. This is the judge who sentenced Roger Stone last week. Over the weekend, yesterday, she issued a short 6-page order in which she rejected a motion from Roger Stone's attorneys that she should recuse herself from any further action in Roger Stone's case because Stone and his attorneys say that she's biased. They wanted the judge to disqualify herself from the case. Judge Amy Berman Jackson deals with the allegations from Roger Stone and his attorneys in this ruling in what seems to me to be a remarkably restrained and even-handed manner. But even so, at the end of her ruling, the thing, I think, necessarily ends on a fairly blunt note. The judge concludes her ruling with this, quote, "If parties could move to disqualify every judge who furrows his brow at one side or the other before ruling, the entire court system would come to a standstill. At bottom, given the absence of any factual or legal support for the motion for disqualification, this pleading appears to be nothing more than an attempt to use the court's docket to disseminate a statement for public consumption that has the words judge and biased in it. For these reasons, defendant's motion is hereby denied. So ordered." That was the ruling from the judge in Roger Stone's case as of yesterday, saying, no, I'm not going to disqualify myself, and no, I'm not biased. And you are trying to create the public perception that I am, but that's not enough of a substantial reason for me to be disqualified from this case. Tomorrow, that same judge intends to hold a sealed hearing, a closed-door hearing, on Stone's motion to get himself a new trial. He's already been convicted on all 7 felony counts for which he was charged. The jury was unanimous in their guilty verdict on all 7 counts. He's been sentenced now to roughly 3.5 years in prison, but he's still nevertheless trying to have his trial thrown out. This is actually the second time he's asked for a new trial by alleging that the jury must have been biased against him, and therefore he should get a second trial. And so after ruling yesterday that no, she's not going to recuse herself from the case, tomorrow that same judge will hear this motion for a new trial in a closed-door session in her courtroom. I mean, the reason this case has evinced this crisis at the Justice Department is because of President Trump and, by extension, Attorney General William Barr wading into it and basically trying to mess around with the resolution of this case rather than letting it be decided independently as a matter of law enforcement. Repeatedly over the past several days, President Trump has moved on from calling the prosecution of Roger Stone a witch hunt and a hoax to now specifically the president is joining this effort by Roger Stone and his attorneys to attack the jury in this case. And the president has specifically been going after individual members of the jury as a way to press for Roger Stone's original trial to be thrown out and for him to be tried again. Now, unusually, and I think we're lucky to have this, but just after Roger Stone was convicted in November, an unusual thing happened. One of the jurors in that case, juror number 3, wrote what I thought was actually a very moving op-ed, a sort of essay about the process of having been a juror in the Roger Stone trial that was published in the Washington Post. It's about having been on that jury, and the juror wrote about how proud he was of how they had conducted themselves as a jury. One of the things he noted was how careful the court had been throughout Stone's trial to protect the jury from harassment and intimidation and improper influence. This is what it said in part. Quote, "During the first half of November, I made a brief journey with 14 fellow Americans, all of them strangers to me. Together, we were the 12 jurors and 2 alternates in the Roger Stone trial. We sat through 5 days of testimony and half a day of closing arguments. After 8 hours of deliberation, we returned guilty verdicts on each of the 7 counts we were charged to consider. Like jurors everywhere, none of us asked for this responsibility, but each of us accepted it willingly. We served the proposition that everyone is entitled to a fair trial and that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. Interest in this case was high, and the court took special steps to prevent us from being harassed or improperly influenced. Each morning, we assembled at a building several blocks away and made our way to the parking garage, where federal marshals loaded us into vans with tinted windows for the trip to court. On arrival, we moved through the building via a freight elevator and back corridors. I believe I speak for my fellow jurors when I say we're proud of our decision. We listened carefully to the testimony of a series of witnesses and carefully examined every element of every charge in its defense, and we unanimously agreed that each had been proved beyond a reasonable doubt. After the trial was over, Judge Amy Berman Jackson came to the jury room to thank us for our service. This was the only time any of us had any contact with her outside of the courtroom. We talked as a group for several minutes. One of my fellow jurors expressed the following sentiment, which sums up my feelings, and I believe those of my fellow jurors. I love America, and this experience has made me love it even more. At the end of our jury service, the marshals drove us back to our meeting point one more time, and the jury went out for lunch as a group. I'm proud of our democratic institutions. Their value was reaffirmed for me because of the process that we went through and the respect we accorded it. I'm proud that a defendant is innocent until proven guilty. I'm proud that we took Roger Stone's rights seriously and that we treated the government's assertions skeptically. I'm proud of my fellow jurors for respecting each other and for challenging each other until we were all convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. At a time when Americans are increasingly distrustful of their institutions, I'm thankful that our legal system affords a fair and open process by which one's peers critically examine the facts. To denigrate that process is undemocratic and dangerous. That was written by juror number 3 in the Roger Stone trial. It was published in November, right after that jury unanimously voted to convict him on 7 felony counts. And now, after that conviction, after Roger Stone's sentencing, the President of the United States is the person who is leading the charge to denigrate that process, to single out individual jurors, including by name, to make them into villains, and to try to tear down any respect that any American might have for the legal process if it produced an outcome that the president doesn't like. And, not incidentally, to intimidate any juror on any future case that might have any impingement on the president's interests, to make you think twice about how you might want to rule as a juror in a case like that, given what happened to those other jurors who got attacked by the president over and over and over again and wrung out on conservative media as somehow the real villains in the case because of the way that jury ruled and because of the fact the president didn't like it. It's jury tampering on a mass national scale, personally carried out by the President of the United States. They go through all of this trouble to protect that jury in the Stone case. Vans with tinted windows, bringing them in through the parking garage, the freight elevator, back corridors. We need to make sure that you are not harassed and intimidated. They rule, and then the president just brings down the harassment and intimidation upon them. Give Roger Stone a new trial. Those jurors, let me name them, they're bad. I know there's a lot going on, but that is a remarkable turn, and it has remarkable consequences for cases going forward indefinitely after the president has done this to the process.